The Winter Impact Gala in Chicago wasn't supposed to feel this cold. Not the weather, the moment. The moment Colin Parsons stopped breathing for half a second, his chest tightening as if time pressed its hand against him. He stood near the entrance, spotlights warming the faces of donors, crystal lights shimmering above him, yet everything inside him dropped to silence the second he saw her. Tasha. She stepped through the grand doorway with the kind of calm strength only life can teach. Her dress caught the light, but it was her presence that made Colin's confidence slip. For years he had trained himself to stay composed under any pressure, but nothing in his polished world prepared him for what came next. A young boy at her side. Derek looked up, curious, steady. And when his face turned toward Colin, the resemblance struck with a force Colin couldn't hide. His own features stared back at him, quiet eyes, controlled posture, a stillness he recognized from childhood. Camera flashes burst like alarms. Heads turned. Conversations paused. In a single instant, a billionaire heir known for perfection felt his entire image crack, right in front of Chicago's elite. This was the moment Colin's past didn't return quietly. It entered the room wearing his face. As Colin stood frozen, one thought struck deeper than the cold Chicago night outside. Some choices never stay buried. And that brings us to you, the viewer. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever made a decision you believed was necessary, only to look back years later and realize it cost you something you can't replace? And here's another. What would you do if the past didn't wait for a quiet moment to return? It stepped right into your life holding a child's hand. Questions like these aren't just dramatic lines. They're part of real human experience, moments where life forces you to face what you once walked away from. Colin never imagined he would confront the truth this way. Tasha never expected their worlds to collide again. And Derek had no idea he was standing between a history he never knew and a future that couldn't remain hidden. These questions matter, because they are the doorway into everything that follows tonight. In that corner of the ballroom, 3 lives stood suspended in a single moment, not by chance but by truth finally catching up. Colin, raised to believe perfection mattered more than honesty, felt the weight of every decision he ever made. His entire life had been shaped by expectations, polished appearances, and a quiet fear of disappointing the people who molded him. But none of that could shield him from the reality now staring him in the face. Tasha, a woman who rebuilt her world from strength and community, didn't walk into that gala seeking drama. She came as a mother, a leader, and someone who learned how to stand tall after heartbreak tried to weaken her. She knew this moment might come someday. She just didn't know it would arrive in front of this many eyes. And Derek, innocent in all of this, carried a truth he didn't even understand. His presence alone had the power to bridge 2 lives, or change them forever. This wasn't a scandal. This wasn't revenge. This was life presenting each of them with a crossroads, the kind that tests everything a person believes about love, responsibility, and identity. And the room around them? Completely unaware of how fragile this moment truly was. Everything that happened between them, the love, the separation, the silence, the life built without explanation, was standing right there beneath the ballroom lights. The truth wasn't whispered tonight. It showed up in person. So the real questions begin here. What truly happened between Colin and Tasha all those years ago? Why was Derek kept away from a world built on wealth and pressure? And what does this night reveal about the cost of choosing status over genuine connection? This story isn't about gossip or glamour. It's about choices and the price they eventually demand. Stay with us, because what unfolds tonight holds lessons about courage, honesty, and the moments in life where we finally face ourselves. And now, welcome back to Mr. Brugman's Stories, where powerful stories don't just entertain, they teach life-changing lessons. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this across YouTube. Today, we begin a new journey, one meant to bring peace, love, and understanding into the world. Thank you for being part of this beautiful family. Your support, your comments, your engagement, they are the reason I continue creating stories that uplift the heart and strengthen the soul. God bless you as you listen to this story. I hope you have a blessed day. The air in Chicago carried a sharp winter bite the morning Colin Parsons stepped out of his car in front of the conference center. Assistants moved around him quickly, checking schedules, carrying folders, updating him on which industry leaders were expected inside. This was familiar to him, people orbiting his life, anticipating his needs before he even voiced them. It was the environment he grew up in, the same one that shaped every part of him. But Colin felt none of it today. The cold seeped past his tailored coat, past the layers of confidence he wore for the world, reminding him that no amount of privilege insulated a man from discomfort he carried on the inside. He walked toward the entrance with a practiced stride, nodding at the people who recognized his last name. Everyone seemed to know who he was before he even spoke. That was the normal rhythm of his world. His family rarely entered a space without the room rising a little straighter. Inside, the workshop hall buzzed with energy, a mix of ambition and quiet tension from entrepreneurs hoping to secure guidance that could shift their lives. Colin scanned the crowd, feeling detached, almost like a guest in a place he didn't choose to be. His parents insisted on his attendance, reminding him this was a chance to understand emerging markets and real consumer perspectives. To them, this was training for a future he never asked for. He took a seat near the front, close enough to be noticed, far enough to avoid conversation. The presenter walked onto the platform, talking about innovation, cultural shifts, and the importance of authentic storytelling in modern business. Colin listened, but nothing connected. He had heard versions of these speeches his entire life. Then she walked in. Tasha entered with a pace that didn't chase attention, yet gathered it anyway. She didn't arrive with an entourage. She didn't scan the room to see who noticed her. She simply found an empty seat near the side, opened her notebook, and leaned forward as if the entire session mattered to her future. Colin watched her for a moment without fully understanding why. She wasn't putting on a performance. She wasn't networking to be seen. She wasn't pretending. She was present, fully, completely, and that alone separated her from the rest of the room. Tasha listened with focus, jotting notes in quick, thoughtful strokes, nodding when something clicked. Her expression wasn't forced. It shifted naturally with each new insight. There was an honesty in the way she engaged, and it made Colin feel strangely self-aware. He realized he was listening to the speaker on the surface, but she was listening with purpose. During a short break, attendees scattered around the hall, forming small clusters of business chatter. Colin's assistant approached with a fresh briefing packet, but Colin barely noticed. His attention was drawn toward the woman with the notebook, who had stepped aside to review her notes alone. Something in him moved before he could overthink it. He walked toward her. "You seem to be the only one here actually trying to absorb the material," he said, voice polite but curious. Tasha looked up, surprised but not intimidated. Her eyes were clear, steady, warm in a way that grounded the conversation immediately. "Why come to a workshop if you're not here to learn?" she replied. Her tone wasn't sharp. It was simply honest. Her words landed deeper than they should have, and Colin felt the truth of them tug at something inside him. He let out a short, real laugh, unpolished, unstaged. "Fair point." She smiled lightly. "So what brought you here? You don't seem excited about being in this room." He hesitated, then gave her an answer he hadn't planned on offering a stranger. "Family expectations." Tasha's gaze softened, reading him without prying. "Sounds like a heavy thing to carry." That was the moment something shifted in him. No one ever described his life with that kind of simplicity. Most people admired his privilege, envied it, or pretended not to care while secretly calculating what it could do for them. But she saw the weight, not the shine. He found himself wanting to keep talking. The next session required attendees to pair up for a problem-solving activity. Colin usually completed these tasks quickly to avoid awkwardness, but today he surprised even himself. "Would you like to work together?" he asked. Tasha nodded. "Sure." They sat side by side, reviewing the business scenario on the worksheet. Colin approached it the way he approached everything, structured, efficient, strategic. Tasha, on the other hand, saw connections, cultural angles, community potential, and emotional impact that he hadn't considered. "You think differently," he said, genuinely impressed. "So do you," she answered, just from another direction. Their styles complemented each other in a way that felt natural, not forced. The team around them noticed. Even the presenter glanced their way more than once, sensing a dynamic that made their work stand out. By lunch, they were talking like people who had known one another longer than a morning. Colin shared stories about growing up surrounded by expectations he didn't choose. Tasha talked about her childhood in Atlanta, where community shaped ambition, not pressure. Her world was full of warmth, laughter, guidance whispered through family traditions, very different from the polished halls he grew up in. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you actually want to build?" Not what his family wanted, not what the market expected, what he wanted. No one had ever asked him like that. He didn't have an answer, but he knew he wanted to hear more from her, learn more from her, sit beside her a little longer. She didn't treat him like the Parsons heir. She treated him like a person. That alone sparked a quiet connection he hadn't felt in years. As the afternoon session continued, they exchanged ideas with an easy rhythm. Their perspectives clashed in interesting ways, but never with hostility. Instead, they found middle ground over and over, discovering quiet similarities. They both paid attention to detail. They both valued growth. They both questioned the world around them. They both believed in becoming better than the circumstances that shaped them. When the workshop ended, people packed up quickly, eager to network or catch an early train. Tasha closed her notebook, ready to head out. Colin stood there for a moment, unsure of whether he should speak again. He wasn't used to hesitation. "Would you like to get coffee?" he asked. Tasha paused, studied him for a quiet second, then nodded. "Yeah, I have time." They walked out into the Chicago evening, the cold biting but strangely energizing. The city lights reflected against the river, and their breath rose in soft trails as they talked, openly, freely, like two people suspended in a moment neither expected but both felt. The emotional foundation wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was real, and it was enough to start everything that followed. Chicago evenings had a way of softening the edges of the day. The wind could be sharp, but the glow from restaurants, the steady hum of cars along the river, and the comfort of quiet corners made the city feel strangely intimate. That was the world Colin and Tasha stepped into after the workshop, two people walking side by side, not knowing they were building something fragile and meaningful. They found a small cafe not far from the river. It wasn't one of the high-profile spots Colin usually visited. No valet in front, no designer lighting inside, just warm air, the smell of roasted beans, and people talking like they actually enjoyed being there. Tasha chose it. Colin didn't mind. He was tired of curated environments. They sat at a small table near the window. Snow tapped against the glass in light, delicate rhythms. "You ever drink coffee without a meeting attached to it?" Tasha teased. Colin smirked. "Not often." "That explains the tension in your shoulders," she said, lifting her cup. He loosened his posture without thinking. "You notice that?" "I notice everything," she replied. "It comes from growing up around people who say one thing but mean another." He laughed softly. "We might have that in common." That conversation, simple, honest, became the beginning of their bubble, a space untouched by Colin's family expectations or Tasha's responsibilities back home. That single evening turned into more conversations, more walks through the city, more shared meals where Colin didn't feel the need to impress anyone. For the first time in years, he felt allowed to be uncertain, curious, imperfect. Tasha brought out a side of him he didn't know how to show. When she laughed, he laughed. When she challenged him, he listened. When she talked about her dreams, he felt something shift in him, like her ambition cut through his carefully constructed life. One night, as they walked across the bridge, Chicago lights reflecting off the river, she said something that stayed with him. "You think too much before you speak." He looked down at their hands. They weren't holding each other yet, but they were close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Everyone in my world calculates their words," he admitted. "Do you want to?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. "Then stop living like people are waiting to judge you." That sentence hit him harder than he expected, and that's when he realized she didn't fall for the name he carried. She cared about the man he was trying to become. Tasha showed him places he had never seen, even though he had visited Chicago hundreds of times. Neighborhood restaurants where owners greeted guests like family. Bookstores tucked between old brick buildings. Community spaces where people exchanged ideas without fearing judgment. Colin felt normal, not a headline, not an air, not a brand, normal. In return, he introduced her to quieter corners of the upscale world. Small galleries, private wine tastings, rooftops with peaceful views. Not to impress her, but to share parts of himself he rarely revealed. She appreciated the experiences, but she wasn't swayed by the elegance. "Nice," she would say, "but it doesn't define you." No one had ever said that to him in his life. Their connection grew, steady, natural, without grand declarations. They fit in ways neither expected, but the bubble had a weakness: his world. The Parsons family didn't confront problems, they whispered around them. Colin's parents didn't ask who Tasha was. They simply formed opinions in silence, letting subtle gestures speak for them. A raised brow when he mentioned her name. A quiet exhale when he said she owned a business. The flat tone of how Interesting. They never said anything direct, no criticism, no outright disapproval. But their silence was louder than arguments. Colin tried to ignore it. He told himself he was grown, that his choices belonged to him. But he had been trained for years to keep the family's image polished. Their reactions clung to him in ways he didn't admit. The real pressure came from the timing. One of the Parsons companies faced public scrutiny after a deal backfired. The board demanded Colin become more visible, to reassure investors, to show stability, to prove the family still held control. The word responsibility was thrown at him like a weight. "You need to present a stable image," his father said one evening. "People are watching." Stable in their world meant predictable. Predictable meant aligning with their version of perfection. And their version of perfection didn't include Tasha. When Colin was with her, the world felt simple. When he stepped back into his family's orbit, everything tightened. "You're distracted," his father observed. "Is this woman helping your future or complicating it?" His mother asked softly. Tasha never demanded anything from him. She didn't ask for commitment, for money, or for public gestures. She only asked for honesty. But honesty was the one thing Colin wasn't trained to deliver freely. He felt split, one part of him growing through her influence, the other sinking into the expectations he was raised to obey. Tasha noticed the shift immediately. She saw it in his hesitation, the way he checked his phone often, the way he paused before answering simple questions. "Colin, is something wrong?" she asked during a quiet dinner. He looked at her, wanting to say no, wanting to pretend everything was fine. But she wasn't someone he could lie to. "My family is pressuring me," he admitted. "They think I need to present myself differently right now." She studied him with calm eyes. "Meaning what?" He couldn't get the words out. She understood anyway. "You're afraid that being with me hurts your image," she said gently. He didn't deny it. Silence hung between them. Not cold, not angry, just real. Their peaceful space didn't collapse in a fight. It faded in small moments. One missed call, one delayed message, one uncomfortable conversation at a time. Tasha didn't cling or chase. She watched him pull away and knew it came from confusion, not cruelty. "I don't want to be someone you hide," she told him softly. "I'm not hiding you," he said, but even he didn't fully believe himself. Their time together grew shorter. Their conversations grew thinner, not because the connection disappeared, but because pressure was closing in on him faster than he could manage. He cared for her. She cared for him. But care isn't enough when a person is torn in two directions. Still, she didn't resent him. She simply understood that the world he came from had more control over him than he ever realized. And that quiet truth was the beginning of their end. The pressure didn't come all at once. It built slowly, slipping into the quiet cracks of Colin's life until he felt smothered by expectations he never fully questioned. Meetings multiplied. Calls from his parents grew more urgent. The board wanted him to step forward as the stabilizing presence the Parsons name promised. And with every demand placed on him, something between him and Tasha shifted. He still saw her, but their time no longer carried the same ease. He arrived late to their dinners, distracted, often apologizing before he even sat down. She never complained. She simply watched him, seeing exhaustion where he pretended confidence. One evening, after another long day shaped by responsibilities he never chose, Colin asked to meet her outside the cafe where they first talked. Snow drifted around the street lamps, falling softly across the pavement. Tasha arrived wrapped in a warm coat, her breath forming faint trails in the cold air. "You sounded tense on the phone," she said. Colin forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." "You've been tired for weeks." He looked away, hands buried in his pockets. He didn't want her to read him too quickly, but she always did. "Tasha, things are changing in my family's company. They need me to be more visible." "Okay," she said softly. "And what does that have to do with us?" He hesitated, and that hesitation hurt more than any words. "My parents think this is a critical moment," he finally said. "They think the public needs to see stability, not confusion." Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes grew still. "Confusion," she repeated calmly. "That's not what I meant." "It's what you said." He exhaled sharply, frustrated at himself. "They're pressuring me to be more careful with my choices right now. They say people are watching." "And you agree with them?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm trying to figure everything out." Tasha didn't yell. She didn't accuse him. She just held his gaze with a strength he both admired and feared. "Colin, I'm not a risk, she said. I'm a person. I know you are. Do you? She asked quietly. Because when you talk like this, it sounds like you're choosing their comfort over your truth. He swallowed, unable to deny it. My world isn't simple, he said. No world is simple, she replied. Yours just has more people pretending it is. The comment wasn't meant to cut him, but it hit deeper than she knew. He stepped closer, wanting to touch her, but unsure if he had the right anymore. I care about you. You know that. Yes, she said softly, but caring isn't the same as choosing. A gust of wind passed between them, carrying the weight neither wanted to name. Tasha, he whispered, his voice unsteady. I don't know how to balance everything. My family is expecting. Stop, she said, raising a gentle hand. I'm not asking you to fight them. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself. He didn't answer, and his silence told her everything. After a long moment, she looked down at the snow gathering at their feet. I won't shrink myself to fit into a world that requires me to disappear, she said. Not for anyone. Tasha, please. You're not choosing me, she said, not with anger but clarity. You're choosing the version of yourself your parents approve of. That's not fair. It's the truth. He stepped back as if the cold suddenly reached through his coat. His breath trembled in the air. I'm trying, he said, voice strained. I know, she whispered. But trying isn't the same as standing. The ache in her chest wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like something she had always known might happen. She had felt the shift weeks ago, sensed the pressure around him, watched him pull away piece by piece. She didn't blame him for feeling trapped between two worlds. But she refused to live in the shadows of expectations that weren't hers. Are you leaving? He asked, though he already knew. I'm letting you go, she corrected gently. There's a difference. Tasha, please don't do this. I'm not the one doing anything, she replied. You made your choice. I'm just accepting it. He reached for her, but she stepped back, not out of anger, but self-respect. You're going to wake up one day and realize what you gave up, she said softly. And I hope, when that day comes, you're strong enough to face yourself. He shook his head, tears threatening but not falling. I don't want to lose you. You already have, she said, not cruelly. But you don't see it yet. For the first time, Colin felt powerless in a way he couldn't disguise. Not with money, not with charm, not with the perfect posture his upbringing drilled into him. He was simply a man watching the only genuine connection he'd ever built walk away. Tasha turned, her footsteps leaving faint marks in the snow as she walked down the quiet Chicago sidewalk. The streetlights stretched along the path ahead of her, illuminating a future she was preparing to step into alone. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she did, she might stay, and staying would mean sacrificing the parts of herself she worked too hard to protect. Colin stood there long after she disappeared from view. His breath shook. His hands trembled. Inside, everything felt split open. He didn't know, couldn't know, that she carried something more than heartbreak with her. A child, a future he wasn't ready for, a truth that would one day return in the most public way possible. Tasha placed a hand over her stomach as she reached the corner. Not because she felt faint, not because she was scared, but because she understood that the life inside her deserved peace. A peace Colin's world could not offer. Not yet. The snow continued falling around them both, one walking toward growth, one standing in the collapse of his own choices. This was the moment everything changed. The first fracture, the first consequence, the first emotional punch of the story. And neither of them understood how deeply this choice would reshape their futures. The morning after Tasha left Chicago, the cold still clung to her coat, but her spirit carried something different. Resolve. Not anger. Not regret. Just a clear understanding of what she needed to do next. She boarded her flight back to Atlanta, the city that shaped her, the city that kept her grounded, the place where her roots held steady no matter how hard life tried to sway her. Atlanta welcomed her with the warmth she had grown up with. Streets humming with familiar voices, corner stores where people remembered her by name, and neighbors who treated her return like family coming home. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and real was exactly what she needed. Her mother met her at the airport with a long hug, one of those embraces that carried unspoken comfort. You're home, she whispered, and those two words settled something inside Tasha's heart. At that time, no one knew about the life growing within her. She hadn't told anyone yet, Not because she was hiding, but because she needed silence to understand her own feelings first. She needed a moment to breathe, but life rarely waits for perfect timing. A few weeks later, when she saw the test confirm what her body had already whispered, she sat on the edge of her bed, hand over her stomach, and said softly, "It's you and me now." There was no panic, no helplessness, just clarity. Once her family learned the truth, the reaction wasn't judgment or disappointment. It was unity. Her mother immediately began preparing balanced meals, insisting that the baby required nourishment from the inside out. Her aunties showed up with advice, remedies, and stories of their own motherhood journeys. Her uncles stepped in with a protective steadiness, offering rides, financial help if needed, and unwavering presence. "You're not alone," her uncle told her one evening, "and this child won't be either." Their support wrapped around her like a shield. This wasn't a community of spectators. It was a foundation built on shared love, shared responsibility, and shared strength. Atlanta had always been a place where people lifted each other, and now Tasha felt it more deeply than ever. As her pregnancy moved forward, Tasha reconnected with the parts of life that made her feel whole. Sunday dinners at her mother's house became a weekly ritual, platters of food filling the table, laughter spilling across the living room, elders sharing stories that held more wisdom than any textbook. She sat among them, hand on her growing belly, listening to the voices that shaped her childhood. Each voice reminded her that she was raising her son. She felt certain it was a boy, with the strength of generations behind her. Her mother often placed a gentle hand on her stomach and said, "This child is coming into love. Remember that on the hard days, when Derek was born, the world felt new again. He had bright, curious eyes and a stillness that reminded Tasha of quiet strength. From the beginning, he absorbed every detail around him, the voices, the colors, the movement of family gatherings. Atlanta became his classroom. He grew up watching young boys dribbling basketballs on community courts, listening to barbershop stories filled with humor and wisdom, attending church services where music lifted people's spirits, and witnessing entrepreneurs selling their crafts with pride. Every corner of his environment shaped him. He saw men who weren't afraid to be leaders and women who moved with dignity. He saw resilience not as a concept, but as something lived daily. He saw ambition that didn't require apology. Tasha wanted Derek to understand that his identity was not a question mark. He was surrounded by greatness everywhere he turned. By the time he turned 5, he already had this natural way of standing beside adults as if he was studying the room. His questions were thoughtful, his observations sharp. He had Tasha's emotional intelligence and an early version of the steady presence Colin carried without knowing he'd passed it on. Tasha watched him grow with quiet pride. She didn't bring up his father, not because she wanted to erase the past, but because she wanted Derek to grow in confidence first, without the weight of unanswered questions. During the long months of pregnancy, something else awakened in Tasha, the desire to rebuild her business with a fresh sense of purpose. She didn't want to just create products. She wanted to create something that reflected her community, her heritage, and the lessons her life had taught her. She returned to her skincare formulas, blending natural ingredients, testing combinations late into the night while Derek slept in his bassinet nearby. Her home transformed into a small lab, containers lined up on the counter, notebooks filled with adjustments, samples stored neatly in labeled jars. She began selling at local pop-up shops. At first, it was slow. A few curious customers, a handful of returning ones, supportive neighbors dropping by with encouraging words. But Tasha didn't give up. She believed in her craft. She believed in herself. By the time Derek was 3, small boutiques across Atlanta started stocking her products. Owners appreciated her authenticity, her quality, and the fact that she explained every ingredient with knowledge and care. Her brand grew, not because she forced it, but because her community trusted her. She created jobs. She mentored young girls. She spoke at local events about entrepreneurship and identity. Every sale was fuel. Every thank you message pushed her forward. Every challenge made her sharper. She wasn't rebuilding from brokenness. She was building from purpose. Atlanta wasn't just home. It became the soil where she planted a legacy for Derek. Life in Atlanta moved forward with a steady rhythm, and Tasha found herself adapting to motherhood and entrepreneurship at the same time. The early years were tiring, yes, but they were filled with meaning. Derek grew into a child who watched everything, absorbing the world like he already understood life was a collection of lessons. Her small skincare line evolved into something more structured. She invested every spare hour she had into it, mixing formulas at night, designing simple packaging during Derek's nap time, writing down customer feedback with the detail-oriented focus of someone determined to grow without shortcuts. Atlanta's pop-up markets became her first consistent platform. She set up her table before sunrise, arranging her jars neatly, creating a warm, inviting display. People often stopped because of her calm presence, then stayed because they trusted the intention behind her products. Made with care, she would say, and the way she said it made people believe her. Word spread slowly at first. A customer recommended her creams to a friend struggling with sensitive skin. A boutique owner came across her stand at a weekend market and asked if she could supply small batches for their shop. A local fitness studio reached out, asking if she could create a natural balm for their members. Each opportunity added a small spark to the fire she was building. Tasha's mother watched proudly as her daughter juggled the demands of business and raising a young boy. "You're building something with heart," she said one afternoon as she helped label jars. "People feel that." Tasha didn't let success rush her. She grew one step at a time. She learned how to manage inventory, how to speak confidently about her ingredients, how to negotiate with shop owners, how to balance bookkeeping with bedtime stories. Her evenings were a blend of creativity and discipline. Derek colored in his sketchbooks while she worked nearby. Sometimes he would glance up at her and ask, "Mom, why do you work so much?" She always answered the same way, because building something takes time. "And I want you to see what consistency looks like." He nodded every time, as if storing her words for later. As months passed, boutiques in different Atlanta neighborhoods began reaching out. Her brand didn't explode overnight. There was no sudden breakthrough, but it grew with steady, loyal momentum. Each new customer brought another. Each review opened another door. She didn't chase visibility. It came to her because her work carried truth. Derek's upbringing was rich in experiences rooted in community. Experiences that shaped him into a thoughtful, grounded child. On Saturdays, he visited the barbershop with his uncle. He sat quietly on the waiting bench, listening to men talk about life, responsibility, sports, money choices, family challenges, and dreams that hadn't been crushed by the world yet. He didn't say much, but he remembered the lessons. On Sundays, he walked into church holding Tasha's hand. He sang along to songs he didn't fully understand yet, but the warmth in the room made him feel safe. Elders greeted him with gentle pats on the shoulder, sometimes offering small words of wisdom that stuck with him longer than they expected. During summers, he played outside with cousins and neighborhood kids, riding bikes, learning basketball fundamentals, laughing until their energy faded with the sun. He never lacked community. He was never alone. He grew up surrounded by people who made sure he understood his value. Tasha watched all of this with quiet gratitude. She knew she couldn't give him a father's presence, but she ensured he had strong men around him, men who led with kindness, guidance, and integrity. One evening, as she tucked him into bed, Derek asked, "Mom, why do people like your products so much?" She sat beside him. "Because I make them with intention." "What's that?" "It means I create them with purpose, to help people, to care for them." He thought about that. "Is that why you smile when you work?" She nodded. "Yes. When you love what you do, even the hard parts feel meaningful." He smiled back, that small, thoughtful smile he had inherited from a man who didn't know he existed yet. By the time Derek turned 6, his personality had sharpened in ways that surprised even Tasha. He wasn't loud, but he wasn't timid either. He spoke when he had something important to say. He listened with an intensity that made adults pause. His teachers noticed. "He's observant," one of them told Tasha during a conference. "He thinks before he asks questions. And his questions have depth." Tasha wasn't surprised. She saw the way he analyzed the world around him. When she brought him to stores carrying her products, he watched how customers interacted, how they reacted to her explanations, how she carried herself in professional spaces. "People trust you," he told her once. She smiled. "Why do you think that is?" "Because you're honest." Tasha felt her throat tighten. Children saw truth that adults learned to ignore. He was also creative. He loved building things, small structures from blocks, drawings of imagined cities, little inventions made from household items. He had a natural curiosity about how things worked, how ideas formed, how effort turned into something real. He also had a quiet seriousness about him, especially when he sensed someone else was hurting. When a cousin scraped their knee, he was the first to bring them a tissue. When his grandmother had a long day, he sat beside her silently until she smiled. He wasn't just observant, he was emotionally attuned. When he turned 7, he began helping Tasha with small business tasks, placing labels, organizing jars, wiping down tables at markets. He enjoyed being part of her work, watching her handle customers with patience and grace. "Mom," he said one afternoon while labeling jars, "I want to help people when I grow up." She kissed the top of his head. "You already do." Raising Derek made Tasha sharper. She became more disciplined, more focused, more determined to build something lasting, not for status, not for applause, but for the future she wanted her son to inherit. Whenever challenges appeared, a shipment delay, a rejected product pitch, financial stress, she reminded herself that growth wasn't meant to be easy. One night, after a long day, Derek climbed into her lap, resting his head against her chest. "You're doing a good job, Mom," he said softly. Tasha closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't quit," he said. "I like that." She held him tighter, because she knew those words defined not just her journey, but his future. Derek wasn't growing up in wealth, but he was growing up in richness of culture, community, purpose, wisdom, and identity. And that richness shaped the very core of the man he would one day become. Growth didn't happen overnight, but when it came with a force that surprised even Tasha. Her skincare line, once a small operation held together by determination and late nights, began pulling attention from beyond Atlanta. It started with a small article written by a local lifestyle blogger who stumbled across her booth at a weekend market. Authentic, thoughtfully crafted, made with care. Those words sparked something. People from different neighborhoods started showing up at her pop-up stand saying, "I read about your products," or "My sister told me I had to try this." It was momentum, real momentum, and Tasha felt it in her bones. Still, she kept her routine. She woke before Derek, packed orders, replied to emails, dropped him off at school, then moved through her day with quiet focus. She had no interest in rushing the process or chasing hype. She wanted longevity, not flashes of attention that faded once the excitement died. But the world had its own plans for her. One afternoon, while Derek worked on homework at the dining table, Tasha refreshed her inbox and froze. An editor from a national magazine had reached out. Not a small feature, not a local highlight, a full profile request. She stared at the screen, reading the message twice, then 3 times to ensure she wasn't misinterpreting it. The editor explained they wanted to spotlight Black-owned brands making measurable impact in their communities, and her name had come up in multiple submissions. Derek looked up, sensing something. "Mom, you okay?" Tasha blinked, breath trembling slightly. "I think someone wants to write about the business. Is that good?" She turned the laptop toward him. Derek's eyes widened. "Mom, that's big." She laughed softly. "Yeah, it is." He smiled, that proud, quiet smile she loved. "Told you people trust you." The magazine sent a photographer and a writer to Atlanta the following week. They visited her workspace, interviewed her about her journey, asked about her ingredients, her culture, her inspiration, and the lessons she wanted to pass on through her brand. Tasha didn't glamorize anything. She told them about starting from scratch, about the support of her family, about the discipline motherhood taught her, about building a brand that wasn't just about profit, but about helping people care for themselves with intention. The writer watched her interact with customers at a weekend market, noting how she took time with every person, answering questions clearly, never rushing them. "You're very grounded," he said. She shrugged lightly. "Life taught me to stay steady." He smiled. "More people need to hear that." When the magazine issue finally released, Tasha wasn't expecting much. She didn't believe one article could transform her life. But the morning it went live, her phone erupted. Notifications flooded in, emails from retailers, messages from customers across the country, inquiries from wellness studios, even interest from small hotels wanting supplies for guest amenities. Her website nearly crashed. Her mother walked into the room holding her own phone. "Baby, you're everywhere," she said, eyes watering. Tasha stood still for a moment, overwhelmed, her hand covering her mouth. All the late nights, all the slow seasons, all the doubts she never voiced out loud. They came crashing into that single moment of realization. People across the country saw value in what she created, not because she came from prestige, not because she had money backing her, not because of connections, because she built something honest. Derek hugged her tightly. "You earned this, Mom," he said. "I knew they'd see you." She exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Thank you, sweetheart." The next few months were a whirlwind. Orders doubled, then tripled. Retailers from different states requested wholesale shipments. Influencers began tagging her products, praising them for their quality, their simplicity, and the care put into each formula. Tasha hired 2 part-time helpers, neighborhood women she trusted. She didn't expand too quickly or sign deals without reading every line. She moved with patience, remembering the same lesson she once taught Derek. Consistency builds legacy. As demand grew, she upgraded her packaging, refining the brand's look while keeping its heart intact. She redesigned the labels, invested in higher-grade containers, and set up a small studio for product photos. Her brand was no longer a local business. It was turning into something people nationwide recognized. Derek witnessed every step. He sat beside her while she packed late-night orders. He held the tape dispenser for her. He placed thank you cards into boxes. He saw her tired, and he saw her determined. One evening, after another long stretch of fulfilling shipments, he sat beside her on the floor. "You don't stop," he said. She smiled. "Not when it matters. When I grow up," he said, "I want to build something too." She wrapped an arm around him. "And you will, because you understand effort." He rested his head on her shoulder. "I learned that from you." Those were the moments she carried in her chest, more precious than any recognition. The breakthrough arrived during a televised morning show. A beauty expert spotlighted independent brands worth supporting, and she proudly held up Tasha's product as her top recommendation. "This woman is doing incredible work," the expert said. "Her story, her dedication, and her formulas deserve national attention." For Tasha, watching that clip felt surreal. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Orders piled up faster than she could process. Emails came in from people thanking her for creating a brand that spoke to them. Later that night, while closing her laptop, she paused. "I never imagined it would get this big," she whispered to herself. But her growth wasn't luck. It was the natural result of resilience, intention, and a community that held her up. This was the second major climax of the story, not explosives or drama, but triumph carved from quiet strength. Tasha didn't chase revenge. She didn't crumble when Colin walked away. She didn't build her success to prove anything to him. She built it because she refused to let heartbreak define her life. Atlanta shaped her into a woman who didn't need validation from the world Colin came from. Her value didn't depend on someone choosing her. She chose herself, and Derek, and everything she touched grew from that decision. When she finally sat down at the end of another exhausting day, Derek climbed into her lap. "Mom," he said softly, "you're important." She kissed his forehead. "So are you." He smiled. "Do you think the whole country knows about your business now?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "But what matters most is that you know what hard work can create." Derek nodded. And in that small moment, she knew she had already succeeded. Colin Parsons stepped out of the black car and into the glass tower that housed his company's headquarters, the winter morning reflecting across the skyscrapers like polished metal. To the outside world, he looked like a man who had achieved everything he was groomed for. Tailored suit, calm expression, firm handshake, the authority of a CEO who carried a powerful family name. Inside, however, the silence of his life followed him everywhere. His office on the top floor had a sweeping view of downtown Chicago, a skyline most people would admire for hours. Yet Colin rarely looked at it. He moved through his daily routine with practiced efficiency, reviewing reports, hosting meetings, signing contracts, but none of it stirred anything in him. Success came easily. Fulfillment never arrived. He often caught himself staring at documents without reading a word. His assistants would ask if he needed anything, but he would shake his head, pretending he was simply deep in thought. The truth was far less flattering. He felt nothing. Every accomplishment blended into the next. Every profit projection felt like a repeat of the one before. He was respected. He was admired, but he wasn't alive. The model entered his life at a moment his parents believed image mattered more than authenticity. She was elegant, poised, and socially perfect, exactly the kind of companion they approved of. Every event they attended together looked immaculate in photos. They stood side by side at galas, fundraisers, charity dinners. Cameras captured them smiling, coordinated, flawless. But behind the scenes, their connection lacked warmth. She treated their relationship like a collaboration. He treated it like an obligation. There was no depth, no real curiosity about one another's inner worlds. She asked about his schedule, his business, his influence. Never about what he felt, what he feared, or what he dreamed about. Colin played the role expected of him. He offered polite conversation, gestures of generosity, and public presence. But when the cameras turned away, silence existed between them like a wall neither cared to climb. Once, during a quiet dinner, she said, "You have everything people want. Why don't you look satisfied?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. If she sensed his emptiness, she didn't lean in. She stepped back. Their connection remained surface level, untouched by vulnerability. He didn't blame her. He wasn't giving anything of substance either. As the months passed, Colin began to notice how much of his life felt scripted. Every calendar entry, every handshake, every public appearance, every conversation with his parents. "You're representing the brand," his father often reminded him. What brand? He wondered privately. Their legacy or his own identity? He wasn't sure anymore. Small cracks began to appear in places he didn't expect. At meetings, he sometimes drifted off mentally, thinking about things far removed from the boardroom, the sound of Tasha's laugh, the way she challenged him, the way she brought reality into his life in a way no one else dared to. When colleagues congratulated him on a successful quarter, he forced a smile that never reached his eyes. When his assistant complimented his leadership, he nodded mechanically. He knew how to perform, but he didn't know how to feel anymore. At a formal dinner with the model, he watched her work the room effortlessly, greeting people with perfect posture and flawless charm. He knew she wasn't pretending. She genuinely enjoyed the spotlight. It was where she belonged, but he didn't belong there. Not really. He just didn't know where else to go. Later that night, as they rode home in silence, she glanced at him and said, "You always look like you're somewhere else." He turned to the window. Maybe the first She didn't ask where. She didn't ask why. And he realized then that a relationship without curiosity wasn't a relationship at all. Colin's life was not falling apart in dramatic fashion. There were no explosions, no scandals, no public collapse. It was quieter than that, a slow erosion of meaning that crept into his days like an unseen leak. He woke each morning feeling the same dull ache in his chest, the ache of a man living the life he was taught to want, not the one he chose. At times he found himself scrolling through old photos in his mind, not actual images but memories, walking by the Chicago River with Tasha, laughing about ideas, sharing moments that made him feel seen, things he hadn't experienced again since she left. His parents praised his discipline. Investors praised his leadership. The public praised his image. But Colin felt hollow. A house built on image might look perfect from the outside, but inside, the structure was weak. And though he didn't know it yet, the moment would soon come when everything he buried beneath that image would begin to rise back to the surface, demanding answers he wasn't ready to give. This was not collapse. Not yet. This was the quiet beginning of it. Colin returned to his penthouse overlooking Chicago one evening, exhausted from a long charity event he attended with the model. Cameras had followed them the entire night, capturing their smiles, their coordinated outfits, the image of a perfect couple. But the moment the front door shut behind them, silence filled the space like fog. She dropped her purse on the marble counter and removed her earrings, sighing as if she'd just finished a performance. "You didn't even try tonight," she said, not bothering to disguise her irritation. Colin loosened his tie. "I showed up. I spoke to everyone we needed to speak to." "That's not what I mean," she replied. "You were somewhere else the entire evening." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm just tired." "No," she said firmly, turning toward him. "You're absent." He didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. She stepped closer, crossing her arms. "You know, Colin, I've dated men who loved the spotlight, men who enjoyed these events. But you walk in with this perfect composure, yet everything about you feels disconnected. What does that mean?" he asked quietly. "It means you don't belong to yourself," she said. "You belong to them." She didn't need to clarify who them was. He knew. His parents. The Parsons name. The image he inherited and learned to guard since childhood. "You move through life like a representative," she continued. "Like someone carrying a script written by people who never asked what you actually wanted." Her words were sharp, but they carried no malice. She wasn't trying to wound him. She was telling him the truth she saw. "And honestly," she added, "I didn't sign up to date a corporation." He looked down. "I didn't intend to make you feel that way." She shook her head. "You didn't make me feel anything, Colin. That's the problem." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that reveals more than words ever could. She reached for her coat and slipped it on with calm resolve. "This isn't working." she said softly. He swallowed. "Are you ending this?" She nodded. "You're not in this relationship. You're performing it, and I'm not going to be part of something that feels like a requirement for your parents' approval." She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. "Before I go," she said, glancing back at him, "I want to be honest with you. You're not unlovable. You're just unreachable. And until you figure out who you are without that last name, no one will ever truly know you." The door shut quietly behind her. Colin stood motionless, staring at the door long after she left. Her words didn't shock him. They echoed thoughts he'd buried for years. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city. Lights flickered across the skyline, moving trains hummed in the distance. People below lived their lives freely, while he remained trapped in a polished cage. Colin poured himself a glass of water and sat at the dining table, feeling the weight of the silence around him. His penthouse, spacious, elegant, meticulously designed, felt empty in a way money couldn't hide. He had success. He had status. He had influence, but none of it filled the hollow spaces inside him. For the first time in years, he let himself sit with the truth. He didn't know who he was outside of obligation. He didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know how to feel joy without permission. He pressed his palms into his eyes, trying to force clarity into a life made of contradictions. The model hadn't broken his heart. She had exposed how little of his heart he had left for anyone to reach. As he sat alone, memories of Tasha surfaced, not because he wanted them to, but because they were tied to the last time he felt real. He remembered the Chicago workshop, how her notebook pages were filled with purposeful handwriting, how she spoke about ambition without losing her warmth, how she looked at him like he was a person, not a project. He remembered walking with her by the river, the cold brushing against them as they talked about life without filters. He remembered the way she saw through him, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made him feel safe. He remembered her final words the night she walked away. "You're going to wake up one day and realize what you gave up." He didn't want to admit it, but that day had arrived. He leaned back in his chair, eyes stinging as he replayed the moment she stepped away from him. No anger, no shouting, just dignity. She had left because she valued herself, not because she didn't care. The memory burned. He placed a hand over his chest, feeling a pressure that wasn't physical. It was the sensation of regret finally settling inside him like an unwelcome tenant. Colin didn't cry. He didn't punch a wall. He didn't pour himself a drink or make a dramatic declaration. He just sat there, still, quiet, emptied, finally understanding the cost of living a life built on expectations instead of authenticity. The model was right. He didn't belong to himself, and that realization made him feel smaller, not weaker, just painfully human. He stood and walked through his penthouse, noticing how every object in the space reflected a version of him that wasn't fully real. Nothing held memory. Nothing held meaning. Nothing reflected the truth of who he was or who he could be. He stopped by the window again, staring out at the city. Somewhere out there, people were building lives with intention, connection, and courage, everything he abandoned when he let Tasha go. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this lonely evening of truth, was the beginning of a collapse he needed to confront before the Gala forced him face to face with his past. The emptiness wasn't the end. It was the warning. Colin didn't sleep the night the model walked out. He lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling as the city lights traced faint patterns across his walls. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Even the hum of traffic below, usually a comforting reminder of the world moving, felt distant and hollow. He rolled onto his side, but the emptiness in the room remained. The bed felt too large, the sheets too crisp, the air too still. He wasn't sad about the breakup itself. He was shaken by what it revealed. He wasn't living. He was functioning. By dawn, he sat on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, eyes tired but dry. The breakup didn't wound him emotionally. It exposed the truth that he had very little emotion left to give anyone. He showered, dressed in a tailored suit, and walked into the day as if nothing had changed. That was the strength and curse of years spent training himself to maintain appearances. No one in his building noticed anything different when he stepped into the private elevator. He looked polished on the outside, but internally something had begun to unravel. When he reached the office, people greeted him with the same respect as always. "Good morning, Mr. Parsons. Your meeting with the investors is at 10. The documents for the logistics expansion are ready." He nodded through each update, but none of it reached him. Conversation sounded distant, like background noise. He sat through meetings where people discussed projections and partnerships, but he couldn't absorb a single detail. His mind kept drifting back to the penthouse the night before. The words the model spoke hung over him. You belong to them, not yourself. He tried to shake it off, but truth never disappears when you ignore it. It lingers. It waits. It pulls at the pieces you've been trying to hold together. That day in the boardroom, he looked around at the polished table, the carefully positioned chairs, the city skyline glowing behind glass. Everything about the space symbolized success, but none of it felt like his. He wondered quietly, what am I doing all this for? Whose life am I actually living? No one in the room noticed his distant gaze. They were too busy discussing projections, strategies, numbers that all blended together. He felt like a ghost in his own life. Later that night, Colin returned home and placed his briefcase on the counter. He walked straight to the window, staring down at Chicago, lights glittering below like a city full of possibilities he never allowed himself to explore. A memory surfaced, not dramatic, not loud, just a moment that struck him harder than expected. He remembered walking beside Tasha by the river the first time they spent time outside the workshop. The cold Chicago wind brushed between them, but he felt warm for the first time in years. He remembered her smile, how it was genuine. Nothing forced, nothing calculated. He remembered how she said, "Stop living like people are waiting to judge you." He closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. That sentence was both a comfort and a sting, reminding him that she once saw potential in him he didn't have the courage to fight for. He moved to the couch and sat down, hands clasped tightly. More memories followed. Her laughter in the cafe, the steady confidence in her voice when she spoke about her dreams, the look in her eyes when she realized he couldn't choose her over his family's expectations. He felt the weight of that choice, now more than ever. Days passed. He attended meetings. He signed contracts. He appeared at events. He maintained the perfect image the world expected. But internally, the cracks widened. One evening, his father called. "We need you present at the Winter Impact Gala," he said. "It's important you represent the family well." Represent. That word hit him harder than usual. After the call ended, he walked back to the window and stared at his reflection. For the first time, he didn't see confidence. He saw someone who had lived according to a script for so long that he no longer recognized the original version of himself. He pressed a hand to his chest, searching for something, emotion, clarity, purpose, but nothing answered. He sat on the couch and whispered into the quiet room, "Why am I like this?" There was no response, only the faint hum of the city below. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He simply felt absent. He was surrounded by everything a person could want, yet inside he carried less than he ever realized. As nights passed, Colin noticed something strange. He felt a persistent pull, as though something in his life was incomplete. Not a memory, not a moment, but a part of himself. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what to call it. But he felt it every time he stared out at the city. A voice inside him whispered questions he never allowed to surface before. What if I walked the wrong path? What if the life I built wasn't mine? What if the person I left behind was the key to the version of myself I never became? The questions didn't come from desperation. They came from awakening. He thought about Tasha, not in longing but in recognition. She represented a time he was honest, raw, unfiltered. A time he saw a glimpse of who he could have been. She had moved on. He knew that. She had no reason to look back. But the truth was simple. She was the only person who ever challenged him to be himself. He had spent years suppressing that truth. Now, it refused to stay quiet. One late evening, Colin stood in his kitchen, staring at a glass of water he never drank. His mind felt heavy. His chest felt tight. His life felt like a beautifully decorated room with no warmth inside. He whispered again, "Something's missing." He didn't know at the time that the missing piece was not abstract. It had a name, a face, 8 years of life behind it. But the internal unraveling had begun, and once a person becomes aware of their emptiness, they can no longer hide from it. This slow collapse, quiet, private, unavoidable, was shaping him for what the Winter Impact Gala would soon reveal. He wasn't ready for the truth that awaited him, but he was breaking just enough to finally face it. Winter in Chicago carried a sharp bite that cut through even the thickest coats, but the cold did nothing to dim the glow surrounding the Winter Impact Gala. The event was one of the most anticipated nights of the year, an evening where wealth, influence, and power gathered under chandeliers tall enough to dwarf the room, where every attendee walked in knowing eyes were watching. The venue sat along the river, its glass exterior reflecting the city lights like a jewel set in ice. Inside, waiters glided through the crowd with polished trays, and a live orchestra played soft. Music that rose and fell like a calm tide. Guests mingled in carefully curated groups, offering handshakes that doubled as silent negotiations. Everything was immaculate, perfect, controlled. And then Colin walked in. He stepped through the grand entrance wearing a tailored black suit, crisp and elegant. Cameras flashed the moment he appeared, because a Parsons never entered unnoticed. Journalists murmured his name. Donors turned in acknowledgement. Board members nodded with approval at his presence. Colin offered a polite smile, the kind he had mastered long ago. But behind it, his chest felt strangely tight. He usually attended events like this with ease. With the model beside him, public appearances were simple. Stand here, smile there, remain composed, represent the family well. But tonight was different. He was alone. His parents hadn't questioned it, assuming he had his reasons. The board hadn't asked either. But Colin felt the emptiness beside him in a way he couldn't ignore. As he moved deeper into the ballroom, conversations softened around him. Not because he commanded fear, because he represented prestige. People respected the Parsons name, even if they didn't truly know the man behind it. He adjusted his cufflinks, breathed deeply, and tried to steady himself. Yet something inside him refused to settle. It wasn't anxiety, it was anticipation, an unexplained sense that the night held more than charity speeches and polished greetings. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to split in two. Outside, a black car pulled up to the entrance. Tasha stepped out first, gracefully adjusting her silver gown as the winter air brushed over her skin. She wasn't dressed to compete with anyone. Her elegance was effortless. She carried herself with a calm confidence shaped by years of rebuilding, growing, and choosing herself. Inside the car, Derek sipped the last of his hot chocolate. When he stepped out, his miniature tuxedo fit perfectly, his shoes polished, his expression alert. He looked around with wide eyes, curiosity brightening his face. Tasha held his hand firmly. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I want to see what a gala looks like." She smiled, a warm, steady smile. "Stay close to me." Together, they walked toward the entrance. The staff didn't question her presence. She was now someone the business world recognized, someone whose success carried weight beyond Atlanta. The moment she entered the ballroom, she felt a shift in the air. Not hostility, not discomfort, just a natural attention someone like her drew. People glanced her way, some with admiration, others with curiosity. Her company's rise had placed her on many lists of entrepreneurs to watch, but she wasn't there for validation. She was there for opportunity, for connection, for expansion, and she was there with her son. Tasha guided Derek toward a quieter area near the center of the room so he could take in the view, the shimmering chandeliers, the elegantly dressed guests, the swirl of energy that came from wealth and influence gathering in one space. Derek whispered, "It looks fancy." She smiled, "It looks expensive." He laughed quietly. Neither of them noticed Colin yet, but he noticed them. Colin was standing near a marble column, engaging in a conversation with a donor, when something shifted in the corner of his vision. A silver dress, a familiar posture, a presence he had felt once and never forgotten. He turned his head, slowly, cautiously, and froze. Tasha, standing under the chandelier light, elegant, whole, confident in a way that struck him deeper than any memory could. It felt as if the air was knocked out of his lungs. His heart didn't race. It tightened, as if recognizing something it wasn't ready to face. But then he saw someone beside her, a boy. Young, dressed neatly, calm, observant. The donor beside him continued speaking, but the words faded into emptiness. Colin couldn't hear anything except the dull thrum of his pulse. He tried to look away, but the boy turned his head at that exact moment, and Colin's world tilted. The stillness, the sharp, attentive eyes, the quiet presence that mirrored the way he himself stood at that age. Everything inside him paused. The donor finally noticed his distraction. "Colin? Are you all right?" Colin forced a shallow breath. "Excuse me. One moment." He didn't approach immediately. He couldn't. His feet were heavy, and his mind raced faster than he could control. Shock wasn't loud. It was quiet, suffocating, impossible to disguise. He stepped behind a cluster of guests, gripping the edge of a table for balance. He had known emptiness before. He had known regret. He had known what it meant to question his choices. But he had never felt something like this, raw, piercing recognition. Tasha glanced across the room, her eyes sweeping the crowd. When she spotted him, her expression softened, not with affection, not with anger, but with the calm acceptance of someone who had already lived through the hardest part of their story. Colin's breath caught once more. He didn't know why she was here. He didn't know why the boy was with her. He didn't know what truth waited beneath the surface. But he could sense that the night was no longer about a gala. It was about truth stepping into the room with its head held high. And it was only the beginning. Colin realizes Derek looks exactly like him at that age. His world fractures. The room's energy shifts. This is the center of the story. The ballroom buzzed with polished conversation and the soft hum of the orchestra, but none of it reached Colin. He stood still, hidden partially behind a pillar near the edge of the room, trying to steady the sudden tremble in his hands. Tasha and Derek stood only a few yards away. He saw them clearly now, not through the filter of memory, not through imagination, but with the harsh clarity of the present. He watched Tasha lean down slightly to speak to Derek. Her expression softened in that familiar, gentle way she once used with him, when they talked about dreams and fears and plans. Derek listened attentively, nodding with that same quiet seriousness Colin had carried as a child. Colin's throat tightened. The resemblance struck him again, sharp, undeniable. The boy stood with the same posture he had at that age, straight, controlled, observant. He scanned the room the same way, eyes moving with intention, taking in details without being overwhelmed. There was a stillness about him, not withdrawn, not timid, just thoughtful. Colin felt his breath falter. He remembered being 8 years old, standing in rooms filled with adults who expected perfection from him. He remembered copying his father's posture, holding his chin a little higher, watching everything closely so he wouldn't make a mistake. The expression Derek wore now was nearly identical to those memories. How could the boy look so much like him? He stepped out from behind the pillar slowly, his heartbeat strangely loud in his chest. The polished floor reflected the lights above, creating a faint shimmer beneath his feet as he moved closer, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Tasha turned slightly as if sensing someone approaching. Her eyes landed on him again. For a moment, neither moved. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't longing. It was recognition. Two paths crossing under circumstances neither could have predicted. Then Derek turned too. The boy's gaze locked onto him with startling clarity. Colin froze. There it was, the moment the world split open. Not a dramatic gasp, not a cinematic collapse, just a quiet, devastating truth settling into place. Derek's face, his eyes, his composure. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. Not a similarity, not a coincidence, a reflection. His fingers curled slightly, nails pressing into his palm. His breath tightened, then caught completely as the realization washed over him. This boy wasn't just familiar. He was connected, blood deep, history deep. His pulse hammered in his ears. The ballroom around him blurred. Conversations faded. The orchestra dissolved into faint noise. The only thing in focus was the child who resembled him more than anyone else ever had. Derek tilted his head slightly, studying him with a calm curiosity that struck Colin like a punch to the chest. He remembered that same gesture from his childhood, how he did it when trying to understand adults who spoke in riddles. He felt unsteady, overwhelmed by thoughts that came too fast. Is he mine? How could I have missed this? Why didn't she tell me? What does this mean? Tasha placed her hand gently on Derek's shoulder. A protective motion, a familiar motion. It was the same way she once placed her hand on Colin's arm when she sensed he was struggling. Colin swallowed hard, but his voice refused to come out. The donor standing nearby noticed his frozen expression. Colin, are you all right? He didn't answer. The donor followed his gaze, then looked back at him with sudden understanding. Do you know them? The donor whispered. Colin didn't reply. He couldn't. His entire world had narrowed to the sight of a boy who carried his face, his quiet nature, his presence. A sudden wave of emotion hit him with physical force. His chest tightened, memory flooding him in flashes. Tasha smiling during their walk by the river. Her voice when she said he wasn't ready. Her bravery when she walked away. The pain her eyes carried that night. Her dignity, Her silence afterward. Silence. He felt the weight of it now. A silence that contained more truth than either of them had spoken. His hand trembled slightly. He tucked it into his pocket to steady himself, but nothing steadied. The truth pulsed inside him like a heartbeat. I have a son. I wasn't there. I didn't even know. His breathing quickened. His mind spun violently. He felt something break inside him, not in a destructive way, but in the way walls crumble when truth finally pushes through. The ballroom seemed to tilt, not literally, emotionally. He felt exposed, like the polished image he spent years maintaining had cracked open in front of a room full of powerful eyes. People were still talking around him, oblivious to the earthquake unfolding in his chest. He felt like a man drowning in the middle of a crowded street, surrounded by noise, yet completely alone. He forced a slow inhale, trying to regain composure, but the truth wouldn't let him retreat. Derek shifted closer to Tasha, still watching him, still studying, still carrying that calm, analytical gaze. Colin felt his eyes sting, not with tears, but with a sharp, unfamiliar ache. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "My son." The words tasted foreign, painful, beautiful, terrifying. Tasha noticed the shift in him. Her expression softened, not in pity, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. She knew this moment would come eventually, whether she planned it or not. She didn't pull Derek away. She didn't step toward Colin either. She simply stood steady, allowing the truth to land. The space between them felt charged, heavy yet strangely calm, like the moment before a long-delayed conversation. A waiter passed nearby, pausing because he sensed tension even without context. Guests gestured subtly, noticing where Colin's attention was anchored, but no one understood. No one except him. No one except her. Colin's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of understanding pressing down on him with full force. He wasn't imagining this. He wasn't overthinking. He wasn't misinterpreting. The resemblance was undeniable. The math aligned. The truth stared him in the face. He lifted his gaze to Tasha, and the question in his eyes wasn't one of accusation. It was one of heartbreak. Why didn't I know? Why wasn't I there? How much did I miss? Tasha held his gaze without fear. Her eyes didn't apologize. They simply told the truth he needed to see. You left. I protected him. And this is the result. Derek looked between them, sensing tension but not understanding its magnitude. Colin finally took a step forward. Slow, uncertain, heavy with realization. Tasha's hand tightened gently on Derek's shoulder, not to block him, but to steady herself. This was the moment everything changed. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with truth stepping into the light. A father seeing his son for the first time. A man confronting the consequences of his past. A mother standing in her power and calm. Nothing would ever be the same. The ballroom lights shimmered across crystalline gold, but for Colin, the room had dimmed to a narrow circle around Tasha and Derek. He took a careful step closer, his breath unsteady, his hands cold despite the warmth of the crowded Gala. Tasha recognized the shift in his posture, the slight lean forward, the quiet desperation settling into his shoulders. She placed her hand on Derek's back, steadying him, then glanced at Colin with a composed, unreadable expression. "Derek," she said softly, "come with me for a moment." The boy nodded, trusting her completely. He didn't understand what was happening, but he sensed it wasn't something chaotic or dangerous, just heavy in a way he couldn't yet name. Tasha guided him toward a quieter hallway just outside the main ballroom. The noise softened instantly, replaced by the gentle hum of distant music and the occasional murmur from passing guests. Colin followed several steps behind, unsure of whether he had the right to approach, but unable to stop himself. When they reached a spot where the crowd thinned, Tasha turned to Derek and crouched slightly. "Sweetheart, wait right here," she said, pointing to a cushioned bench near a decorative wall display. "I'll be right over there." Derek nodded without protest. He sat, folding his hands neatly, watching them with quiet curiosity. Only after she confirmed he was settled did she turn fully toward Colin. This was the confrontation neither of them had ever prepared for. Colin swallowed hard. "Tasha, is he?" She lifted a hand gently, stopping him. "Colin, breathe." He tried. The inhale came sharp, uneven. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a pressure he didn't yet know how to manage. Please, he whispered. I need to understand. Tasha looked at him a long moment before speaking. Her voice remained calm, steady, grounded in the strength she had earned over the years. He's 8, she said. Colin felt the air leave his lungs all at once. 8. The exact number of years since he walked away. He pressed a hand against the wall behind him for support. A soft gasp escaped him, not dramatic, not loud, just the sound of a man hearing the truth he feared. Tasha. His voice cracked slightly. Why didn't you tell me? She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. Her reply carried the weight of honesty, not resentment. You made your choice, Colin, and I refused to build a life for my son on someone else's uncertainty. He lowered his gaze, shame washing over him like cold water. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I know you didn't, she said. But knowing isn't the same as being ready. Colin looked at Derek again, sitting quietly, legs swinging slightly off the bench, looking around the hallway with curiosity. The boy carried the same stillness Colin once did, the same habit of observing before speaking, the same reflective nature. A son he had never met, a life he had never touched, a history he wasn't part of. The realization nearly buckled his knees. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Tasha, I don't know how to describe what's happening inside me right now. You don't have to, she replied calmly. This isn't about the right words. He nodded slowly, but his breath still shook. Did he ever ask about me? She paused, a pause heavy enough to answer the question before she spoke. He asked if I was ever in love, she said softly. I told him yes, and that it taught me everything I needed to know. Those words struck him deeper than any accusation could have. Not because she aimed to hurt him, but because she didn't. Tasha, his voice broke again. Does he know anything about who I am to him? No, she said firmly. He doesn't know. I wasn't going to tie him to someone who wasn't present, emotionally or physically. He pressed a hand to his chest without realizing it. The ache there grew sharper. And now? He asked. That depends on you, she said. Not on guilt, not on impulse, not on shock, on consistency. The meaning landed clearly. If you want to be part of his life, you must earn your place gently, not through promises, through actions, through patience. Colin nodded slowly, absorbing every word. I want to be in his life, he whispered. I want to know him. I'm not standing in your way, she replied. But this can't become chaos for him. His peace comes first. He looked at her fully then, really looked. The strength in her voice, the calm in her posture, the lack of bitterness, the steadiness she had built without him. She wasn't the woman he left. She was stronger, clearer, whole, and he wasn't the man she once knew. He was learning his own emptiness for the first time. Tasha's expression softened just slightly. Not forgiving, not inviting, simply human. Colin, she said gently, he's a child. You can't unload years of regret onto him. You can't show up desperate or overwhelmed. If you want a place in his life, you have to build it slowly. He nodded again. I understand. I feel like my entire world shifted in one moment. It did, she said simply. Mine shifted 8 years ago. He closed his eyes briefly, fighting the weight of her words. Do you hate me? She shook her head. No, I don't hate you. That kind of emotion died a long time ago. He opened his eyes again, and the quiet truth in hers nearly broke him. Hate fades, she continued. But clarity remains. I chose peace for myself and for him. That's the life we built. He looked toward Derek again, small, quiet, swinging his feet while watching the hallway. The sight nearly undid him. He's my son, Colin whispered. He is, she said. And he's also mine, and he's been loved every day of his life. That won't change. I never wanted to be the kind of man who wasn't there. You weren't absent, she replied softly. You were unaware, there's a difference, but now that you know, the responsibility is yours. He inhaled shakily. Can I talk to him? Tasha considered this for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. Yes, but gently. Keep it simple. He doesn't need complicated explanations tonight. Colin nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear, awe, and gratitude. Thank you. This isn't about forgiving you, she said calmly. It's about doing what's right for him. She turned slightly, calling softly, Derek, Come here, sweetheart. The boy stood and walked toward them. Colin steadied himself. His entire world condensed into the footsteps of a child approaching him for the first time. When Derek reached them, he looked up at Colin politely. "Hi," the boy said. Colin's voice nearly failed him, but he managed a quiet, steady reply. "Hi," he said. "It's really good to meet you." And as Derek's curious eyes met his, Colin felt something he hadn't felt in years, something missing finally clicking into place. Not perfection, not redemption, not instant healing, just truth. And truth was enough to change everything. The gala continued behind them, music steady, laughter rising in waves, champagne glasses clinking, but none of that reached Colin. He stood in the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, his breath uneven, his thoughts scrambled, the truth still pulsing through his mind like a shock he couldn't contain. Tasha watched him carefully. She didn't move toward him, didn't comfort him, didn't soften the moment. She simply stood grounded, letting him process what he had spent 8 years avoiding, the consequences of choosing image over love. Colin ran a hand across his face and inhaled shakily. "Tasha," he whispered, voice breaking around the edges. "I made the worst mistake of my life." She didn't respond immediately. Her silence wasn't punishment. It was clarity. She was not going to rush into forgiving words. Not tonight. He stepped back slightly, leaning against the cool wall as if his legs couldn't hold him. "I didn't know," he said again, voice trembling. "I swear to you, I had no idea." "I know you didn't," she replied. "But knowing wouldn't have changed who you were back then." Her tone was calm, not cruel, measured truth, the kind that forces accountability without raising its voice. Colin's chest tightened. The truth settled deeper. He wasn't ready then. He might barely be ready now. He looked at her fully, eyes shining with the weight of everything he couldn't rewind. "Tasha, I walked away from you thinking I was doing the responsible thing. I thought my family's expectations mattered more than what we had." "They did matter," she said softly. "Just not in the way you hoped." He blinked, confused. "You wanted approval more than you wanted connection," she said. "And I wasn't going to compete with a legacy I never asked to be part of." Her words didn't land as an insult. They landed like truth he finally had space to hear. "Back then," she continued, "you weren't choosing between me and your family. You were choosing between who you were taught to be and who you could have become." Colin lowered his head. "And I chose wrong." "Yes," she answered simply. "You did." He swallowed hard. He wasn't used to a world where honesty didn't come wrapped in politeness. She'd always spoken truth with dignity, and this moment was no exception. After several breaths, he asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me about Derek?" Tasha didn't look defensive. She didn't look ashamed. She looked calm, rooted in her reasons. "I found out I was pregnant after you left," she said. "And I had to ask myself a question. Would telling you help our child, or would it drag him into a life built on pressure and public image?" Colin's jaw clenched slightly, not in anger, but in painful understanding. "You were already struggling," she continued. "Emotionally. Identity-wise, you weren't present in your own life, Colin. How could you be present in a child's life?" He lifted his head slowly. "I still deserve to know." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "You did. But I also deserved peace, and my son deserved stability. Those things mattered more at the time." The honesty was sharp, but not vindictive. She wasn't trying to win an argument. She was telling her truth. "When a woman becomes a mother," she continued quietly, "her decisions stop being about fairness. They become about protection." He absorbed that with a slow nod. The realization settled painfully deep. There was no version of the past where he would have handled fatherhood well. Not then. Not in the state he was in. "I'm not blaming you," she added. "I'm explaining why I chose what I chose." Colin exhaled shakily. "I would have tried." "Yes," she said, "but trying from the wrong place creates harm, not help." He pressed his thumb to his brow, his voice cracking. "I wasn't ready." "No," she agreed softly. "You weren't." He lifted his gaze again. "But I'm ready now." Tasha held his eyes steadily. She did not give him what he wanted, not reassurance, not forgiveness, not instant access to a role he hadn't earned. "Readiness isn't about emotion," she said quietly. "It's about consistency. Derek doesn't need a father who appears because he feels guilty. He needs a man who shows up because he's stable." Her words hit him deeper than any confrontation he'd ever experienced. "Tasha," his voice dropped. "I'm sorry for everything, for walking away, for hurting you, for not being the man you needed, for missing 8 years of his life. I'm sorry. Tears didn't fall, but his voice carried the weight of someone finally admitting the truth he'd been running from. She nodded once, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that. He looked toward Derek again, still sitting quietly on the bench, small hands folded in his lap, the picture of calm curiosity. Colin swallowed. What do I do now? Tasha stepped slightly closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. You start by not rushing, she said. He's not a missing piece for you to claim. He's a child with a full life, with people who've been there since the beginning. You step into his world, slowly, gently, and humbly. That's how you begin. He nodded, absorbing every word. And Colin, she added softly, he doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a present one. Those words finally broke something open inside him, not in a destructive way, but in a revealing way. He had spent his entire adult life chasing perfection, image, legacy, only to discover that none of it prepared him for the one role that mattered now. He felt it, deep, raw, human, the desire to show up, the desire to be better, the desire to become someone worthy of meeting his son. I want to try, he said again, voice steady this time. And you will, she replied. But not tonight. Tonight, he just needs a gentle introduction. Nothing more. Her boundaries were clear, her dignity intact, her protection unwavering. And for the first time in his life, Colin respected a boundary not because it was imposed on him, but because he understood its purpose. Derek sat on the cushioned bench where Tasha had guided him earlier. His legs swung gently, polished shoes glinting under the hallway lights. He wasn't frightened, he wasn't upset, but he wasn't relaxed either. Something in the air felt different, not scary, just unfamiliar. He watched his mother and Colin from a distance, not close enough to hear the conversation, but close enough to notice their faces, their movements, the way they stood. He saw the way his mother held her posture, strong, calm, steady, something he always admired about her. He saw how the man speaking to her kept glancing toward him, then back at her. Derek wasn't old enough to understand adult complexity, but he was sharp enough to sense when something important was happening. He slid his hands together in his lap, listening to the distant echo of the orchestra through the ballroom doors. A few guests walked past, offering polite smiles as if understanding the boy was waiting for someone. He nodded politely but didn't speak. His attention stayed fixed on his mother. He felt a small tug in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name, something like curiosity mixed with a soft thrum of realization. Something about the man with her felt familiar, not in a memory, in a way he couldn't articulate. After a few minutes, Tasha walked toward him. Her expression wasn't worried or tense. It was gentle, the kind she used when preparing him for something new. She crouched in front of him. Sweetheart, she said softly, there's someone who wants to say hello to you. Is that all right? Derek looked past her shoulder toward Colin. The man stood still, hands at his sides, almost like he was afraid to move too quickly. Derek tilted his head a little, thoughtful. Is he important? Tasha smiled faintly. He might be, but you get to decide how you feel. No pressure. Derek nodded slowly. He trusted his mother, always. I can talk to him. She brushed his cheek with her thumb. Just be yourself. He stood, straightening his tuxedo the way he had practiced earlier that evening. His mother guided him toward Colin, her hand resting lightly between his shoulder blades. Colin inhaled sharply at the sight of the boy approaching him. This was the first time he saw Derek up close, really saw him. The details struck him one after another, the shape of his eyebrows, the stillness in his gaze, the gentle seriousness in his expression. It felt like watching a memory of himself walk forward. Tasha gave Colin a small nod. Her meaning was clear: keep it simple, keep it soft. He's a child. Colin crouched slightly, lowering himself to meet Derek's height, not to intimidate, but to show respect. He didn't reach out. He didn't rush. Hi, Colin said gently. It's really nice to meet you. Derek studied him for a moment, as if trying to match the face in front of him with the quiet sense of familiarity he felt earlier. Hi, Derek replied. I'm Derek. His voice was soft but confident. Colin smiled, genuine, small, nervous. That's a strong name. Derek shrugged lightly. My mom picked it. Colin nodded. She has good taste. He glanced at Tasha for a brief moment before focusing entirely back on the boy. How are you liking the gala? It's different, Derek said honestly. Everything is shiny. Colin let out a quiet laugh. That's a fair description. Derek stepped a little closer, curiosity blooming in his expression. You looked surprised when you saw us. Colin froze for half a second, not expecting such a direct observation, but he recovered with care. I was, he admitted. But in a good way. Derek nodded thoughtfully. You looked like you were thinking a lot. Colin exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure how much to say, but he knew he needed to honor the boy's honesty. I was thinking about how important moments sometimes happen when we don't expect them. Derek blinked, absorbing the words in the way only perceptive children do. Is this an important moment? Colin swallowed before answering. For me, yes. Very much. Something softened in Derek's expression. Not recognition, not understanding, but acceptance. Children didn't need full explanations to sense sincerity. Colin gestured gently toward the intricate chandelier overhead. Do you like the lights? Derek looked up. Yeah. They look like stars, but indoors. That's exactly what I thought the first time I saw them, Colin said softly. Derek's eyebrows lifted. You've been here before? Yes, Colin replied. Many times. But it feels different this year. Derek tilted his head slightly. Because of us? Colin hesitated, but only for a moment. Yes, he said quietly. Because of you. The hallway seemed to stand still. Tasha watched them closely, her posture grounded, protective, but not interfering. She saw the way Derek's eyes softened just a little, not out of attachment, but out of curiosity. A door was opening inside him, not fully, not dramatically, but gently. Colin lowered his voice even more. Can I tell you something? Derek nodded. You look like someone I used to know very well. Derek blinked. Who? Colin's eyes warmed. A younger version of myself. Derek didn't react with shock, just thoughtful silence. He looked at Colin more intently now, as if comparing features, searching for meaning. After a long moment, Derek said quietly, I kind of thought you looked like me too. Colin had to look down at the floor for a second, steadying himself. The simple honesty nearly broke him. Tasha stepped closer, not to interrupt, just to anchor the energy, to remind Derek he wasn't alone in processing something he didn't yet understand fully. Derek looked up at her. Mom, is he someone important to you? Tasha didn't rush her answer. She chose her words carefully. He was someone I knew a long time ago, she said gently. And tonight, you're meeting him for the first time. Derek nodded slowly. That was enough for him. Children often accepted truth in pieces. They didn't demand the whole picture at once. He turned back to Colin. Are you staying for the rest of the gala? Colin smiled softly. If you want me to. Derek shrugged with a small smile. You can. It's just nice talking to you. Colin's chest tightened. It's very nice talking to you too. It wasn't forced. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was a beginning, small, quiet, rooted in sincerity. And for the first time in his adult life, Colin felt something unfamiliar blooming inside him. Hope. The orchestra inside the ballroom shifted into a softer melody, the kind that floated gently through the doors and settled in the hallway like a calm breeze. Derek walked a few steps ahead, curious about a framed artwork displayed near the entrance. His small hands rested against the fabric of his tuxedo, still processing the new presence in his world. Tasha and Colin stood a few paces behind him, the air between them calmer now, heavy still, but no longer charged. It was the kind of quiet that followed truth after it settled into the room. Colin exhaled slowly, grounding himself. He had spoken to his son for the first time in his life. The moment still echoed through him, stirring emotions he didn't even know he was capable of feeling. Tasha watched him carefully, not as the man she once loved, not as the man who hurt her, but as the man who now needed to understand the difference between a moment of truth and the journey that must follow it. Colin, she said softly, drawing his attention back to her. Before anything moves forward, we need to be clear on one thing. He nodded immediately. Anything. Tell me, this isn't a second chance at us, she said calmly. This is a first chance for you and Derek. The sentence landed without cruelty, without sharpness, just truth laid bare with dignity. Colin absorbed it slowly. The part of him still bruised by regret tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. He didn't attempt to negotiate. He simply listened, because for the first time in his life, he understood that listening was the only place to start. I'm not asking for that, he answered softly. I'm not trying to step backward. I just want to be present for him and for whatever future he deserves. She nodded once. Good, because Derek comes first. Always. He glanced toward the boy, who was still studying the artwork with quiet fascination. I understand. No, she corrected gently. You're beginning to understand. There's a difference. He took in a steady breath. Then help me understand the rest. Tasha folded her hands loosely, posture firm but not cold. If you want to be in his life, you'll have to move slowly, consistently, carefully. That means showing up when you say you will. No broken promises, no disappearing, no emotional chaos. You have my word. Your word, she said gently, has to become action. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Over time. Colin felt the weight of that expectation and accepted it without hesitation. He had spent 8 years performing for the world. Now he had to show up for one child with sincerity. You know, Tasha continued, her voice softer now, for years I thought about what I would say if we ever stood face to face again. What did you imagine? He asked quietly. That I'd be angry, she admitted. That I'd tell you how much it hurt. How much your decision cost us. He swallowed, bracing himself, but her expression shifted. But then life happened, she said. I grew. Derek grew. My world changed. My heart healed in ways I didn't expect. And I realized something important. What's that? He asked. Holding on to pain doesn't raise a child. Purpose does. He lowered his gaze, humbled. You've become stronger than I ever knew. I had to be, she replied. For him, and for myself. That's what I regret most, he said quietly. Not that you became strong because I always knew you would, but that I wasn't there to witness it or support it. Her eyes softened, not in romantic nostalgia, but in acknowledgement of the honesty he was finally capable of. You weren't ready for the life we were building, she said. But that doesn't mean you can't build something healthy with him now. Derek walked back toward them, stopping between his mother and Colin. He looked up at them both, first at her, then at him. Are we going back inside soon? He asked. Soon, Tasha said. Did you enjoy looking around? He nodded. The painting looked like a snowstorm. Colin smiled gently. You described it well. Derek shrugged modestly, but seemed pleased. There was a pause, a soft, natural one. Then Derek looked at Colin again with quiet curiosity. Will you be around more? He asked. Tasha inhaled subtly. This was the moment she wanted handled delicately. Colin knelt slightly, not crouching fully this time, just lowering himself enough to meet Derek's eyes respectfully. If your mom agrees, he said carefully, I'd like to spend time with you, slowly, in ways that feel comfortable for you. Nothing rushed, nothing confusing. Derek absorbed the words with a careful consideration unique to children who feel deeply before they speak. Okay, he said softly. I think I'd like that too. Tasha watched her son closely. Derek wasn't attaching himself recklessly. He wasn't confused. He was simply open, curious about someone who had stepped into his world with sincerity rather than pressure. And that was enough. They walked a few steps away from the bench, the hallway quiet around them. Before re-entering the ballroom, Tasha stopped and turned toward Colin one final time. You need to understand something, she said. I'm listening. Truth doesn't erase the past. It doesn't fix the years you missed. It doesn't repair what broke between us. He nodded, steady. But truth does one thing, she continued. It restores clarity. It gives us the chance to move forward with honesty instead of assumption. That's what tonight is, clarity. Colin felt the truth of her words settle deep in his chest. Tasha, thank you. For your strength, for your honesty, for raising him the way you did. She didn't blush. She didn't shrink. She didn't deflect. She simply received the gratitude she deserved. He's a good kid, she said softly. He would have been a good kid with or without you. But now he has the chance to know you, not as an idea, but as a person. Don't waste that. I won't, he said. And for the first time in 8 years, he meant every syllable with clarity. As they walked back toward the ballroom doors, Derek slipped his hand into his mother's. After a beat, he looked toward Colin and offered a small, shy smile. Colin felt something warm bloom in his chest, something he hadn't felt in decades. Possibility, not certainty, not redemption, not reunion, just possibility. Tasha glanced back at Colin once more. Her expression carried strength, not softness. This is co-parenting, she said. Nothing more, nothing less. If something else ever grows from this, it will grow from trust, not history. He nodded. I understand. And this time, he truly did. Should Tasha give Colin a second chance? Should he build his role slowly, proving his consistency? And in real life, what does forgiveness truly look like? Their story wasn't finished. Not neatly, not magically, not romantically, but honestly. And that is where the deepest lessons live.